Live from the TV30 studio, here is Jim Schneider.
Well, good evening and welcome to inFocus. We're glad you joined us tonight as we talk about a number of Second Amendment-related issues. Matter of fact, we're going to be talking about the impact of the 2020 election, even though results are still pending. We're going to be taking a look at what some of the scenarios are as it relates to who is going to be living in the White House here coming up in this next four-year term. We're also going to be taking a look at the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting in Kenosha. There are some who are saying this is a matter of murder. Others are saying, no, it's a matter of self-defense. We'll be delving into that issue this evening. We'll also be ascertaining our guests' thoughts on a number of matters, even to the Castle Doctrine, as it's applied here in the state of Wisconsin. We'll be looking at a foster family in the state of Wisconsin that was denied their Second Amendment rights. We'll be taking a look at a couple of school districts that have some lawsuits that have been brought against them here in our state, again, pertaining to Second Amendment and also related First Amendment-related issues as well. And certainly we're also going to take a look at why the scarcity of guns and ammo that so many have noticed in our stores as well. So stay tuned for this and much more. Nik Clark is with us here tonight, Chairman and President of Wisconsin Carry Incorporated. They're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation and the reclamation of basic human rights critical to a free society. Good to have you with us.
Jim, it's my pleasure.
I'd like to begin with the election here this evening. It's certainly front and center with what many are thinking about here, even though the media has declared a winner. I looked at the Constitution. It's not the media that declares winners of presidential race. It's the electors. We have states that are yet to certify their votes in this regard, but a number of legal challenges. We know President Trump has been an advocate for the Second Amendment. The former vice president, though, has not been an advocate, though, for the Second Amendment. Your thoughts on what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, historically, I've often suggested to our membership that the biggest push from gun control is probably going to come at the state level. And then every time we have a mass shooting, a national mass shooting, and then things start to happen at the federal level, and I start to get proven wrong. So I'd like to be optimistic and say that we shouldn't expect anything from the federal level, but I'm actually very concerned. I think that there's more of an audacity by the liberals to push gun control, I think, in spite of the fact that it's something that Bill Clinton famously said that was his one mistake, was taking on gun control and the NRA. Now, the pro-gun movement is so much bigger than the NRA, and I think I think some people feel the NRA right now with some of the controversy and some of the, I don't want to call them scandals, but some of the issues that have been put out in the media, that the NRA is in a weaker position than they are. But I think a number of things, universal background checks, red flag laws, those are legislatively areas where I would see potential legislation coming that should be concerning for all. And then the other one, and I think this is more of a subtle, is we really have to be on guard for the persecution of people who, it's not enough to be able to own a gun, but if you can't use that gun, then there's really no point. And I think that's what we're seeing, a bigger cultural push to demonize the use of a gun for self-defense, and that should be very concerning to people. And that's not going to come through legislation necessarily, more of a cultural push, but as I've always told our members, cultural change leads to legislative change. And we need to work on that cultural change. We need to work on that culture of pro-gun movement. Because if we think that the Second Amendment or Castle Doctrine or any of the concealed carry, if those are going to protect the right, they won't, because it's really a cultural change that drives legislative change.
The jury is still out as to who's going to be the president for the next 4 years because there's a number of lawsuits that have been filed in a number of states right now. But I'd like to harken back. We know where President Trump stands on this issue, but I'd like to air a video clip from former Vice President Joe Biden as he was in one of the debates and talking about his policy here for Second Amendment. And let's watch that clip and then we'll have you comment on it.
And every day in our country, over 100 people die from gun violence. You all have plans, I know, on this stage to address the gun crisis, but Congress has not been able to pass a major gun legislation in a quarter of a century. And just think about this. In those 25 years, we've had Columbine, Newtown, Parkland, Las Vegas. We could go on and on. Vice President Biden, I want to start with you. Why should anyone have faith that you're the one who can get this done now?
Because I'm the only one that ever got it done nationally. I beat the NRA twice. I got assault weapons banned. I got magazines that could not hold more than 10 rounds in them. I got them eliminated, except we had a thing called an election with hanging chads in Florida, and it was not reauthorized. In addition to that, I passed the Brady bill with waiting periods. I led that fight. But my friend to my right and others have, in fact, also given to the gun manufacturers absolute immunity. Imagine if I stood here and said we give immunity to drug companies, we give immunity to tobacco companies. That has caused carnage on our streets. 150 million people have been killed since 2007 when Bernie voted to exempt the gun manufacturers from liability. More than all the wars, including Vietnam, from that point on. Carnage on our street, and I want to tell you, if I'm elected and I'm coming for you and gun manufacturers, I'm going to take you on and I'm going to beat you. I'm the only one who's done it.
Nick, give us your reaction.
Yeah, well, the thing that's very concerning is Joe Biden will be the weakest president that we've ever had, ruled by, and then the problem with that is he'll be ruled by the radical vice president. I mean, if Kamala Harris and the election results are certified and he becomes president, Kamala Harris, the most liberal senator in the Senate, will be driving policy. The Democrat establishment will be driving policy, and they're not going to settle for anything less than their ultimate goals, which is, again, gun control, the things I talked about. That's the mechanisms I'll move them through, is universal background checks and red flag laws. But they will be ruled by the radical element of their party. I mean, that's what we've seen in this election. That's the reason Kamala Harris was chosen as the vice president, because that radical left wing of the party has a great deal of power, and that should be concerning to people. This is not a moderate administration. Joe Biden, if he was viewed as a moderate, we all know that his capacities are dwindling, and everybody knows that. And Joe will be a lame duck president. I mean, the odds of him being able to fulfill another term if he serves one is unlikely. So the power is going to come from the left, the radical base, and that should be very concerning to gun owners, because they will ram it through. And
he is saying gun manufacturers, we're coming for you.
Right, and that's what we've seen through, and I'm a free market guy, but we've seen the power of media, that cancel culture to affect, people that talk about not being able to get merchant accounts, gun dealers and things that can't get merchant accounts, that have difficulties getting bank accounts because they're in the gun business. So there's a number of ways that even not through legislation, but through the pressure that administration and bureaucrats and federal agencies would put on people, on corporations, that's very concerning, is how they could accomplish things without legislation. That's what we should be aware of, too, is the way that they will accomplish these things without legislation.
And I think he must have misspoken about 150 million people being killed by gun violence.
Yeah, added to his 10 gaffes a day, but that's a number that they like to throw out there. They don't want to talk about crime. They don't want to talk about the factors that lead to gun violence. They just want to focus on the gun issue and blame the gun, and that's obviously a faulty logic used by Democrats.
Just one other clip from the former vice president as he was talking with Cooper Anderson at CNN. Let's watch this clip.
So to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period. Look, the Second Amendment doesn't say you can't restrict the kinds of weapons people can own. You can't buy a bazooka. You can't have a flamethrower. The guys who make these arguments are the people who say the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots. We need the protection against the government. We need an F-15 for that. You need something well beyond whether or not you're going to have an assault weapon.
So how would you deal with all the assault weapons that are already out there that people have?
What I would do is I would institute a national buyback program, and I would move in the direction of making sure that in fact was what we tried to do, get them off the street.
But that's not confiscating people.
No, that's not walking into their homes, knocking on their doors, going through their gun cabinets, etc.
So people would be allowed to keep the weapons they already have?
Right now, there's no legal way that I'm aware of that you could deny them the right if they had legally purchased them. But we can, in fact, make a major effort to get them off the street and out of the possession of people.
We've heard this often, get rid of assault weapons. We need to ban assault weapons. Can you define that for us?
Yeah, well, assault weapon is a term that the media likes to use to demonize a certain type of firearm. what they call assault weapons, AR platform rifles. It actually stands for AR, doesn't stand for assault rifle, it stands for Armalite rifle, and then that's just kind of been used ubiquitously like Kleenex is used for tissue paper. But these are the most popular guns in the country. I mean, they are multi-use. People use them for hunting. They use them for home defense. They have high-capacity magazines that are great for situations like, well, riots, which we see all around the country. If you want to protect yourself, I'm sorry, but you're 5-shot with thousands of potential looters and rioters standing outside of your house or your business. Not just for the actual use of, but for the threat, the deterrent factor, to be able to deter people. If they see you standing there with Joe Biden's double-barrel shotgun, that's not a deterrent like a modern sporting rifle. And I'm not afraid to use the term assault rifle, but because the left tries to make that a pejorative. But these are the most popular guns in the country. And when they talk about banning those, they're talking about banning the modern types of rifle that people want to own, because they're so versatile, useful for hunting, useful for home defense.
This coming January 5th will be the runoff election for the state of Georgia for the final 2 Senate seats for the U.S. Senate. Right now it's 50 for the GOP, 48 for the Democrats. How critical do you see these seats for the U.S. Senate?
That's the key to what we have to deal with from a legislative standpoint. And again, we're going to get gun control from the cultural push, we're going to get it from the media, we're going to get it from bureaucratic agencies, from the ATF. They're already doing things in that regard, and they have been doing things in that regard. So we're going to see gun control from all the other ways, but how much of it we see legislatively is going to revolve around whether or not they get control of the Senate. So that's very concerning. And it's even concerning if they're only a couple votes away, because we know that there's a few Republican senators that are pretty squishy when it comes to some of those what are considered, the media likes to call them 80-20 issues, and they're not. That's based upon faulty polling and misrepresentation of reality. But again, things like universal background checks. But even the assault weapon ban, I mean, if that was going to come legislatively, a Senate majority for the Democrats with Kamala Harris as the tie-breaking vote would be extremely concerning. From
the legislative branch and executive branch, let's look at the judiciary for a bit here as well. Amy Coney Barrett has just been put on the U.S. Supreme Court, and this past Friday they had their first conference on Second Amendment-related issues. What are these cases concerning?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of cases, and I'm not sure which ones. There's so many out there. I mean, I tend to focus on Wisconsin and the cases that we've got going, but I've seen some of the cases. The crux right now with some of these cases is Heller and McDonald. Those have established a lot of rights when it comes to owning firearms. Some of the rights left to be established are whether the right to own and keep and bear arms exists outside of the home. So those are some of the cases that could potentially be more landmark cases going forward, is to establish that right to keep and bear arms outside of the home, because just being able to own a gun, protect your home with a gun, that's different than being able to go about with the gun. And so that's where those previous cases that have set the precedent that we have this right, it applies to individuals. And even states, or excuse me, cities and things that have tried to ban guns, that's been established that they can't do that. Those are, again, the Heller and the McDonald decisions. But what's yet to be established is the right to keep and bear arms outside of your home when you're going about your daily business and those kinds of things. And that would be important to, there's state constitutions that might include that, but to have that, the Second Amendment incorporate those rights as well would be very important.
There have been several opportunities for the court to take Second Amendment cases, and they have been refusing them, kicking the can down the road, so to speak. This has angered, in some regard, Justice Alito. And matter of fact, this just appeared at bearingarms.com, and Justice Alito threats in the Second Amendment case as an affront to the Constitution. I just want to mention here at the top of the page here, it says, of course, the ultimate second-tier constitutional right in the minds of some is the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. From 2010, when we decided McDonald versus Chicago, until last term, the Supreme Court denied every single petition asking us to review a lower court decision that rejected the Second Amendment claim. Last year, we finally took another Second Amendment case, and what happened after that is interesting, goes on talking about that. But there are those who view the Second Amendment, as he states, as just a second-tier constitutional right. That's the way it's been viewed by many, but it really is not a second-tier issue, is it?
Yeah, it's really not. And if we look at, turn on the TV and look at the last 6 months, last 8 months of what's been going on in this country, and people see that the right to keep and bear arms, the need to keep and bear arms is as critical as ever.
Yeah.
And also, people should be aware that in the eyes of the left in this country, the law-abiding gun owner is the greatest threat. And they'll say this over and over, and they'll throw the term militia on it, but the militia that they're talking about me and you. They're talking about gun owners when they talk about militia. You assemble people that went to Kenosha, not just Kyle Rittenhouse, who's been in the news and notable name, but other people that just wanted to protect their businesses. That was labeled as a militia, and that was looked at in a pejorative. And I mean, what kind of bizarre world are we living in that people that wanted to save their own business and their own homes and needed the help of someone else to do it? You've got a business, and you've got a mob of thousands of people. You can't protect that by yourself. Now you get a couple of friends to help you, and all of a sudden that's being labeled as a militia. That's very concerning, and that's that cultural push that we should really be concerned about, because the Second Amendment is as needed now as ever. I mean, I think a lot of people are realizing that, and it's reflected in the marketplace. It's reflected in Kenosha. You couldn't even find a gun. I mean, the people were flocking to gun stores. The gun stores were sold out. Look at ammo nationwide. People are stocking up on ammunition shortages because of the demand that people see from all this stuff, from these riots, from the defunding of the police that either can't help you or ordered not to help you. You have to be your own bodyguard, and people are realizing that. And that's where people need to be aware, is that don't believe that the media portrayal represents reality, because it doesn't. People think when you see what's happening with gun purchases, what's happening with ammo purchases, people get it. And the media won't represent that, but understand that you're not alone in that mindset, that we really need to be concerned for our own self-defense now. And that is a majority view, and the media won't represent it that. The media might represent that people feel that everybody's out there supporting Black Lives Matter and the protesters, and they're really not. And that's that misrepresentation that people need to have an awareness of. Seek alternative forms of media, because the worst part is when people feel like they're alone, and that's when they start to give up hope.
We know that there's been a huge movement on the part of the leftist liberal agenda, Black Lives Matter and so forth, for calling for a defunding of the police. We are seeing that happen in a number of cities. Some major cuts in some city budgets have happened in regard to this. I laugh because in a recent city budget where you have one city council member who was calling for defunding of police ended up calling 911 because of a confrontation they had with an Uber driver or something, and I found that just kind of ironic there. But City of Milwaukee as well has, we just passed a budget here in the city, and we are seeing the proposal of, I think, some 120 less police positions, 60 sworn officers less in the budget just passed by the city council, and the mayor had proposed. Are we just doing so much better as a city? Crime and violence is decreasing, that we are willing to give up these many officers here?
Yeah, and it's, you look at the news, and the news sits here focusing on coronavirus and Black Lives Matter protests. Meanwhile, we're setting a record this year for murders in Milwaukee. I mean, and a record that is held since, I think, the early 90s, when we were in the middle of the crack epidemic. And
the Jeffrey Dahmer years
correct.
was involved with that.
This is not a safe time here in Milwaukee, and just because you turn on the news and they're too busy focusing on coronanoia and all kinds of other things to talk about, because in any other year, we would be talking about the record number of murders in Milwaukee. But again, I mean, you look at even without defunding the police, people should be aware that the police, look at Kenosha. What did the police do in Kenosha? They protected the government buildings. The neighborhoods were on their own, and you talk to people who live in Kenosha. I have friends in Kenosha, and in Kenosha, they were on their own. Your average citizen who lived anywhere close to the downtown area was scared to death. They were up all night. They had anybody in the home that was old enough, they were armed to protect their home. And that's what the streets were lawless. There was people chasing the police out of certain areas. If you don't see that and realize that the police either will be ordered not to help you or won't have the resources to help you, that should be a wake-up call to people. And that's the concerning thing, is even without defunding the police, it's who's ordering these police, what kinds of directives are these police being given to not help people. I mean, you are on your own out there, and we've seen that in such full display the last 6 months in Kenosha and in other places.
Well, sleep well, because there will be scores less police officers in the city of Milwaukee.
Which would only exacerbate the problem.
I find it also interesting, just last month we had the Common Council Milwaukee voted unanimously to adopt legislation to establish this unarmed first responder program, like mental health, substance abuse, homelessness crisis. Are you optimistic this is going to work?
You know, and I forgot the name, but I saw it the other day on the news, there's an intervention team. There's a team, a violence intervention group already that's been a part of the police department, and they're supposed to intervene in instances where there's retaliation stuff. And I don't think that's working very well because, look, we have record murders this year. So all this notion that there's going to be that there's a better solution out there. I mean, the solutions that we've seen for years, and on my side of the argument here, is we have a soft on crime court system. We have people that feel no repercussions when they commit violent acts, and it starts with stealing cars, and when you don't get punished for that, that emboldens you, and you feel like you can commit greater crimes. And it starts with stealing cars, and then it moves to carjackings, when you're forcibly removing people from cars while you're armed. And so when you see these things happen and people don't receive punishments, that does lead to, again, this feeling of invincibility, this feeling that there's no consequences for your behavior. And that manifests itself over the course of a very short period of time, not chasing people. I mean, this is what drives the crime, is this lack of, and people say, well, you can't throw them all in jail. Well, if you started putting people in jail, if instead of someone stealing a car or carjacking someone, because until you shoot someone in Milwaukee, you don't face serious consequences. So you can even carjack someone with the threat of violence. And you see that person, you know what that person did, you live in that neighborhood, and then you see them back on the streets 3 days later. They spent the night in jail, 2 nights in jail. They got some street cred. They get to brag about that. But there was no consequences. Then they have a court date, and then they end up with probation or suspended sentence, and people realize nothing bad happened to them. And that's what drives the crime issue, is this feeling that there's nothing bad going to happen to you if you commit crime in Milwaukee, because the courts aren't going to. So they want to have mental health and crisis counselors and all these things. I mean, that criminals laugh at that. Criminals laugh at that kind of stuff, just like criminals laugh at gun control. And so we see these problems. We see the lack of willingness to embrace solutions. And I'll just be honest, we saw the last gubernatorial election. We picked a governor based upon potholes and pre-existing conditions, while crime had been rampant in Milwaukee, and they didn't even make it an issue. And so my message to the Republicans in Madison is, crime is an issue. Even if it's not an issue in the news, because the news is portraying this false reality, record murders in Milwaukee. That's what the people who live in Milwaukee see every day. That's what people who live in Milwaukee are worried about outside of their front door. And if you take crime on as an issue, it's a winning issue. And there's so many solutions to that: self-defense, protecting people. We're going to talk about castle doctrine later. But the solutions that are being proposed are not going to work, and they haven't worked in the past, and they're not working right now. And the one thing that we see too often in government is they never admit a mistake and change course. They just want to do more of whatever they were doing that didn't work.
Nik Clark is with us here tonight, Chairman and President of Wisconsin Carry Incorporated. You've mentioned Kenosha a number of times, and certainly it's on everybody's minds here as of yet. And especially with the proceedings happening now with Kyle Rittenhouse. And he has been recently extradited from Illinois to the state of Wisconsin. Some believe that he is guilty of murder, and others saying, no, this is indeed a self-defense. Give us your perspective on what we see the actions taken by Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, so the first question, when this happened, one of the first reflexes of gun owners was to throw him under the bus, because if it's you face so much discrimination in the media, being a gun owner, that the first impulse is, and I call it firearm owners inferiority complex, to just cast aside someone that does something. So they were blaming, oh, he was 17, he shouldn't have had a gun. Well, actually, state law actually provides an exception for 17-year-olds to be armed. So, so my first thought was people should avoid that reflex to throw him under the bus, to use an analogy. But the second thing is, why was Kyle Rittenhouse there? That was the second angle people took, is they said, well, he shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Some are accusing him of being a white supremacist.
And I'm glad that the attorneys that he have are famously known for suing people who misrepresented and made false allegations like that in the media. Because Gwen Moore, she was on Channel 12 News in Milwaukee calling him a white supremacist. There is zero evidence of that. Zero evidence. She was on the local network news calling him a white supremacist, as were others. And that's things that I hope that they'll, as this whole thing unfolds, and I have an idea of where I think this is going to end up, But once I think this thing resolves itself, that's going to be the second stage. Is I think there's going to be civil suits against these people who made these false allegations, and that should put them on notice, just like put CNN on notice with the whole instance back in D.C. where there was a protest, and in another situation where Lynn Wood was a lawyer in that case. But I say, why was Kyle Rittenhouse there? Remember the first night they could have called out the National Guard, they didn't, and anybody who had a brain knew that was going to happen in Kenosha. And so they let this violence occur, and then people turned on the TV the next day, or they were on Facebook, or they were on social media, and they saw a 70-year-old store owner trying to protect his store from looters and arsonists with a fire extinguisher, and someone came up and they hit him on the side of the head with a brick, and he's knocked out on the ground. And people saw that. Why was Kyle Rittenhouse there? Because he couldn't, in good conscience, sit there and watch an innocent 70-year-old store owner get beat down and have nobody there to help him. That's why Kyle Rittenhouse was there. Now, I wasn't there in Kenosha, but I understand why people were so moved by that they wanted to go help, and that's what he was there to do. It's clear he was there clearing graffiti earlier in the day. He was there to protect businesses. That's well documented. Even news sources had interviewed him before the situation happened, and that was well documented. The whole thing's caught on video, which to me, I believe, is clear self-defense. His defense team has put out a compilation of those videos and shown, I think anybody in his circumstance would have reacted very similarly. I think that the way he reacted was almost textbook. He was trying to, we always say, don't instigate, retreat if possible. That's one of the things we teach people. When the confrontation began to occur with Rosenbaum, he tried to retreat. He didn't say, oh, I'm here, I'm big and tough, I have a gun, and I'm going to... No, he tried to retreat and get out of that situation without having to use force, and Rosenbaum chased him. Threw a lit bag of flammable liquid, which fortunately didn't go off, but then someone behind fires a gun. So a reasonable person would think, I'm being chased, I hear a gunshot. It's totally understandable why he felt like his life was in danger. And again, he was being chased by someone who had previously said that they were going to, and I don't want to misquote, but Rosenbaum had made threats against him. So then the rest of it was captured on video. He stuck around, he didn't run away, and then when people started yelling, get him, well, there was no reason to say, get him. He's standing right there, and he wasn't threatening anybody at that point. This is all on video. And so then after people start threatening him, then he has to run to deliver himself, and then people chased him and attacked him, people that didn't know. And that's another thing we teach people. And when we talk about self-defense is you make sure you understand a situation before you attack someone, or even if you were to use your gun to defend someone else. When he's running down the street and people say, get him, and you can hear people say on the video, well, what did he do? Oh, he shot someone. You need to know what happened in a full situation, because the people went after Kyle Rittenhouse. He was not threatening them. He wasn't threatening anybody around them. He was trying to get out of that situation and get to police, to safety. And so that doesn't change things. The fact that the people, this mob of people who didn't know what was going on, told someone to get, that's the fault of the kid with the skateboard that went to swing it at Kyle Rittenhouse. That was his fault for not knowing and for believing what some random mobster around him was yelling and taking that as reason to go against. So what I think is going to happen, I think, and first we've seemed to have forgotten in the media and everywhere else that you're innocent until proven guilty. There's a clear claim of self-defense here, but yet even on social media, you're prohibited from talking about, this being scourged from social media against community standards to even talk in support of Kyle Rittenhouse. And that's another thing that's pretty scary. I tell people, if you ever end up, what's the chilling effect of other people who would want to protect their business when they say, look at someone who tried to protect someone else's business? And again, if you have a large business, you have a corner car dealership, you're not going to protect that by yourself. You're going to need the help of other people to protect that. And then you see what happened to Kyle Rittenhouse, and does that chill people even thinking about self-defense when this is the whole point of the Second Amendment is self-defense. I mean, in addition to protection against aggressive tyranny and those kinds of things. But what a chilling factor of people who might want to protect their business and their property when that's under attack and their livelihood. 70-year-old guy's out there in Kenosha trying to stop his mattress store from being burned down. He's not a wealthy guy that's just going to say, I'll let my insurance deal with it. There's a reason why 70-year-old business owners were out there trying to defend their businesses, because that was his livelihood. Yeah. And that's what I think is so concerning here is, and I've been glad to see people in support of Kyle Rittenhouse. They're not in the media. You won't hear that. You won't hear that side in the media. But on social media, when it squeaks out in places that it's not being censored, there's a lot of support for Kyle.
And we understand felony charges have been brought against the individual who actually purchased the rifle that Kyle was using that evening.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting because I think they're trying. I don't know how
they're viewing it as a straw purchaser.
Yeah,
or what?
well, I don't know how they're going to find a jury in Kenosha that's going to convict Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, you go to Kenosha and you talk to people who were there, and they were scared to death, and then they're going to. So trying to find a jury to convict Kyle. So I think they're looking for other angles to try to find somebody to convict for something here, and so. It'll be up to that. There's a lot of legal questions. I don't believe that was a straw purchase. I don't know all the facts. I haven't read the charging documents, but you can provide a gun to someone else. If you're going hunting, you can give someone else a gun to use. That's not a straw purchase. If you're defending a business, you could give someone else. If you're defending your home, you could give someone else a gun to use. So I think it ultimately is going to come down to if Kyle Rittenhouse's actions are deemed lawful. I find it hard to believe that there would be a crime committed because you're allowed to lend someone else a gun. And again, Wisconsin law making that exception for people 16 and under, there's a pretty clear indication that you wouldn't be allowed to possess a firearm in that situation. But 17, there's exceptions made in state law that allow 17-year-olds to possess firearms. And again, if we had an honest media, an honest network media, you would have heard about those, but no one wants to talk about those.
Let's talk about Castle Doctrine, bring that into here. Does that apply in this situation? Help us understand a proper rendering of what the Castle Doctrine is, because there are some misconceptions.
Yeah, so here in Wisconsin, we have Castle Doctrine. What that does is it changes the presumption. If you were to use deadly force, let's say that there's a lack of evidence, but in a certain circumstance, and those circumstances are in your home, in your business, and in your car. In those three places, your home is your castle, you're given these extra protections. And by that, if you use deadly force in those situations, and again, there's conditions, you have to be present in the vehicle, the business, or the dwelling. You can't be committing an dangerous unlawful activity, so if you have a drug house, you're not given the protections of Castle Doctrine. But if those conditions are met, then you're allowed, or excuse me, the jury will be instructed that deadly force was presumed. You have this presumption that deadly force was justified in the absence of evidence. Now, the problem is that presumption can be overcome. And how could that presumption be overcome? Well, video evidence is a great way to overcome presumptions. So if there's video evidence, so some people think, well, if you're in your own home, you just blank check to use deadly force. And I would caution people, the same conditions that justify deadly force should be present in your home or in your business or in your vehicle as they would be in any other place. So don't use the mindset that when you're in your home, you could be less judicious in the use of deadly force. Pretend like Castle Doctrine doesn't exist. It does, and it will provide you some legal protections, but don't think of it differently, because let's say you have a home security system, and if it shows someone was in your home sitting in the middle of the floor and they weren't threatening you at all, that allows a prosecutor to overcome that presumption that deadly force is justified. There was no video in your house. They might have to presume deadly force is justified absent other evidence. So now again, evidence might be if the shot was in the back. If you shoot someone in your home but it's in the back, now certainly it could have been dark, but if they have evidence to the contrary, like your lights were on and you shot someone in the back, well, that would say that deadly force wasn't justified. So they could overcome that presumption. So that's Castle Doctrine shifts the presumption of deadly force being justified and puts that burden on the state. But I caution people that there's many ways to overcome that presumption. So don't rely on Castle Doctrine when it comes to thinking about the use of deadly force differently.
Nik Clark with us here tonight, Chairman, President of Wisconsin Carry Incorporated. I'd like to talk about a couple lawsuits that you've been involved in, one of which earlier this summer, Wisconsin Carry had filed a lawsuit on behalf of Brian and Katie Lafferty, a Washington County couple in circuit court there, foster parents, and their Second Amendment rights were in jeopardy. What was this case about, and how has it been resolved?
Yeah, so hasn't been resolved yet, but there's been some interesting developments. But the first thing was, in Washington County, if anybody wanted to be a foster parent, there was a questionnaire that they had to fill out, and among those questions, essentially what it boiled down to is they weren't going to allow people who owned or possessed firearms from being foster parents. So in other words, you're basically a second-class citizen if you want to be a foster parent. You don't have this, the Constitution apparently doesn't apply to you according to Washington County. You don't have the right. I mean, could you imagine if a county said if you want to be a foster parent, you can't go to a political event? I mean, that's essentially, First Amendment protections, Second Amendment protections, guns and firearms. There's certainly many rules about safe storage of firearms, and those could be discussed. But merely owning and possessing firearms, having concealed carry licenses, carrying a concealed weapon legally, that was prohibitive in Washington County from being able to be a foster parent. So when Wisconsin Carry heard about this, it's come up a time or two before, but Washington County was one of the few places where they had this, it was documented that they weren't allowing someone to be a foster parent if they exercised their right to keep and bear arms, their Second Amendment rights. So we filed a lawsuit in that situation. They were being prohibited from fostering children. Now, recently, in the past couple of weeks, we filed a motion for an injunction forcing, essentially, while this case works its way through the courts, which takes a period of time, the Washington County had to place foster children with the Laffertys. And then about a couple weeks ago, the Washington County did place foster children with the Laffertys. So it essentially made our motion, our attorney's motion for a temporary injunction, moot, because we were asking them to force them to to allow them to be foster parents while this case works its way through. Washington County went ahead and did place. So I think Washington County might have seen the writing on the wall that this wasn't, they weren't in a good position.
But that case continues.
Continues, yeah, because so they're still going to make that argument, and Washington County is still going to try to make the argument that foster parents shouldn't be allowed to have guns.
You also have a lawsuit against a couple school districts, Kettle Moraine and Neenah. What's happening?
These are my favorite cases because I talk about this with our membership, that we have to advance the cultural support. Cultural change drives legislative change. We can see it in so many other issues, whether it was civil rights. The cultural change started first, and then after it became popular, then politicians glom onto it and start wanting to pass legislation to support whatever that cultural change was. But the cultural, this isn't a discussion about gay rights, but in gay rights lost in the courts, we had federal, Defense of Marriage Act and all these other things. But then they started, when they lost at all those levels, they lost from legislation, then they went for the cultural change. And then look what's happened. I mean, even the Defense of Marriage Act was knocked down. So again, not a comment on gay rights, but with gun rights, they've lost at every level. I shouldn't say every level. There's been many losses for the gun control crowd. So now they're looking to push this cultural movement. And make a cultural change, because if they have a cultural change, then they drive legislative change. So if they make guns demonized, unpopular, and how they were doing this was through our school system. If you tell every child that guns are evil, guns are bad, essentially what these lawsuits, kids had T-shirts with images of firearms on them. Now, as long as those T-shirts were non-violent, non-threatening, those are protected. That's protected speech. We've won a case in Markesan a couple years ago. But here, this last year, Kettle Moraine High School wanted to do the same thing. A student had a T-shirt with a picture of a gun. They punished that student, said he couldn't wear the shirt. We filed a lawsuit. Right around the same time, Neenah School District did the same thing. A student who just had a picture of the gun and a shirt, nothing violent, nothing threatening. And they prohibited that as well. So we filed these lawsuits because if we allow schools to demonize the mere image of a firearm, portray this notion that firearms are bad. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out after a couple generations we're not going to have a voting majority that supports the Second Amendment because they've been demonized against it for their first 18 years of their life. So that's what we're trying to do here is with these lawsuits is establish that it's a First Amendment issue to be able to wear shirts, to be able to express your pride in the Second Amendment and guns. But if we allow schools to demonize guns, I mean, guns are such a tremendous part of our heritage. I mean, that's what I think should be taught in schools, of how our country's freedom was gained by average citizens with firearms. Our country was settled by settlers who had firearms to provide protection, put protein on the table for them. I mean, our country owes its freedom and our way of life to firearms in the hands of law-abiding citizens. But if you're not going to teach that, certainly you shouldn't be demonizing guns that you can't even have a picture of a gun. For these students. So recent updates in that case, the districts who the cases were joined at the court level, they filed a motion to dismiss. A judge denied that motion to dismiss, saying that this was protected speech. So a judge has already ruled that it is protected speech. Now the issue is whether that protected speech exists inside of a school. So certainly protected speech would be something that you're free to, it's protected speech out in public, other places, but in a school situation, is it protected speech there? That's what's remaining to be litigated in that case, even though in previous cases we've already been successful.
Nik Clark with us here tonight. Friends, we've talked a number of issues We've got more, but I'd like to open our phone lines as well. Give you opportunity to call if you have a brief comment, if you'd like to ask a question. Our phone number here to inFocus, 414-935-3030, 414-935-3030, toll free, the number 800-733-8830. That's 800-733-8830. And if you'd like to text in your question this evening, you can text your question or comment, a brief comment, to 414-439-3585. That's 414-439-3585. The shortage of guns and ammo on the shelves all tied into just where we are in the culture as far as the riots and so forth?
Yeah, I think what started that, I mean, even when the pandemic, the coronavirus started to happen, people saw shelves being empty of food, and then that, of course, triggers some people's reflexes that, look, if people don't have food, that could cause civil unrest. And I think that started the movement for a lot of people to stock up on ammunition. That's what I really saw in the spring, was ammunition was in short supply. Mm-hmm. And then once the civil unrest started with what happened, protests after the George Floyd situation, and then Kenosha, that's when the gun purchases spiked as well, which had been high for years, just with the discussions about gun control. I mean, there was, and it's something that the number of people getting into the movement, I mean, women are the fastest growing segment of the concealed carry population, so you've got a whole bunch of new buyers of firearms. It's not just the husband carrying, it's the wife wants to carry as well. Mm-hmm. And so there was all these things driving demand for guns and ammunition, and then you add in riots and things, and that just drives the demand off the charts. And now with the potential for an anti-gun administration, it's only going to go higher.
Yeah. COVID impacting that at all?
I think in the spring it did on the ammunition shortage front. Mm-hmm. I think people just thought, hey, if we're stocking up on toilet paper, might as well stock up on ammunition as well.
Interesting.
But yeah, I think the riots and the potential change in administrations, that's really driving the firearm purchases.
We've got Tony calling in from Milwaukee. Hi, Tony, you're on the air.
How you doing, sir? How you doing, Nick?
Fine,
How you doing, Jim?
Thanks for calling. Go ahead.
All right. Check this out, sir. I want to make reference to the Castle Doctrine. I'm a lover of the Castle Doctrine. Mm-hmm. That should tell you a lot about my personality. Number two, I just want to know if the Second Amendment right bear arms, the original drafting of the Constitution, is this still into effect, or is it contentious? And it goes as follows, sir. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Mm-hmm. This amendment has been interpreted in two ways. Some people believe it gives ordinary citizens the right to possess firearms. Others believe it only gives each state the right to maintain its own militia. Okay. In 2008, the Supreme Court ruled that the amendment protects not only the right of states to maintain militias, but also the right of citizens to own guns for such purposes as hunting and self-defense.
Okay, Tony,
answer,
very good.
Have a great day, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Let's talk about it. Is this Second Amendment obsolete?
Yeah.
Does it have real meaning? Is this an individual right versus just, well, states, you can set up a militia, you can have a National Guard, that's okay?
Yeah, and that's what was established in the McDonald and the Heller cases, is that this is an individual right. So that's been established by Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court precedent. Mm-hmm. The next step of that is does that right apply, the right to keep bear arms apply outside of the home, and those are the cases that haven't been litigated yet.
Kirk is sending a text here. How can we decrease the crime rates in Milwaukee? Many cases are drug dealing, gangs, single parents, no father-in-laws, indicate we need a revival. And what about, how do we get we talked about the escalating crime. What's the solution? So
two sides of that. I mean, when there's crime that occurs between two individuals, and let's call this drug-related, gang-related, where there's two people engaging a retaliation for someone that's offended someone else, and they're going to take it out with guns. I mean, there's not from a Second Amendment standpoint, that's not there's no solution in terms of keeping bear arms there. But when it comes to crimes against people, whether it's carjacking, look, if every time someone went to carjack a car, they had a gun stuck in their face by the person they were carjacking, mm-hmm. Carjackings would end. And so that's what, that would be a deterrent, and those are the kinds of things. They don't go. No one goes to a gun store and holds up a gun store because all the employees are armed. So there is, on that side of things, there's the opportunity to deter crime by being armed. And if more people were armed and then, quote, crime didn't pay, you would see a reduction in those types of crimes. Now, that's not going to address these other types of crimes, which I think we need the court system in Milwaukee. And for that, you're going to have to get to the polls for these local races instead of just a presidential race. Get the polls for local races. Who are you putting in as the DA who's choosing what to charge and what's not? Who are you putting in as judges who are going soft on these individuals? And when you look at those things, you can address some of these.
Many times you're running unopposed, a DA running unopposed, and in so many cases the judges running unopposed. And as you said, Nick, there are many times people say, oh, that's just spring elections, it's local, it's just judges, it really doesn't matter, but it does.
It does matter. It does matter. And if you look at, you'll see someone arrested on the news, and then the news will say this person faces, 10 to 15 years in jail, and trust me, look at what they actually get, and it's either a fraction of that or not even incarcerated. They're given parole, probation.
Let's go to Brad, West Dallas. Good evening, Brad.
Hey, Brother Jim. With regard to, I just wanted to touch on what the other caller said about the well-regulated militia so people understand that the language has changed since our founding era when that was written. Well-regulated meant that you were proficient in operating your firearm, you knew what you're doing. Because you might be needed to help form a militia and repel the enemy. So that's what that means. Another thing is what I've seen in the media, I've noticed people complaining, editorializing when they should be giving us the news, about the people who back up the cops in Kenosha. And they say, oh, they're doing it without authority. Well, Black Lives Matter was doing what they did without authority too, and nobody complains about that. And the same thing with Antifa. They're a little choosy as to who doesn't have authority. And who are these mayors to call off the cops, to tell them to stand down? If they're going to call off the cops, you're depriving the people the police protection that they paid for with their property taxes. So you should send the money back, not give it to a bunch of psychiatrists or other psychobabblers.
Brad, thank you for the comment. We'll have Nick respond here.
Okay.
It was interesting. Let's take Kenosha, and he says, people call off the cops. The police were there. They were to protect government buildings. Citizens were on their own. But what I find so ironic, and then this is where the news media is both at fault, and we need to call them out for it, is people were terming, Kyle Rittenhouse was termed as a vigilante. Vigilante is someone who goes out seeking justice without using the court system. And I say to myself, these people who are rioting and not letting the law work its way through with determining if a police officer was justified in the use of force, those are the people that are vigilantes. They're not waiting for the legal system to take its course. Look, in Minnesota, we've had riots. I mean, how many riots across the country? How many people died in riots from Minnesota? Those officers have all been arrested and charged with murder. Now, I don't think the murder charges are going to hold. I think those officers have some culpability there. Murder, I don't think, was appropriate, and there's so many details of those cases. But either way, those officers were arrested and charged with murder. These people, the vigilantes, are the ones who aren't waiting for that legal process to work its way through. Meanwhile, we have Kyle Rittenhouse and others, hundreds of others of people who went to Kenosha to protect people, to provide protection for people who they saw for the 2 days prior to that were on their own. And those people being those people being termed vigilantes by the media, and that's shameful for the media to even use that characterization. But when we have discussions with our friends and our family and others, that's the conversation we should have. Who's the real vigilantes here? And it's not the armed citizens who are just there to protect people.
Here's another texting question. Here's a scenario: if a mob is burning down your neighborhood, coming to your home next, can you then protect yourself and what's left of your neighborhood with a firearm?
See, here's a difficult situation, and I believe that laws are here to protect the rights of the law-abiding. And I think that when it comes to a mob and a riot situation, we're lacking in laws to provide adequate protections for individuals. Because as an individual, you can't use deadly force to protect property. You can only use deadly force to protect your life. But that becomes a gray area when if someone's standing outside of your property with a Molotov cocktail in their hand, they're not exactly threatening your life, but if they throw that on your house and your house starts on fire, then, so the conditions that justify the use of deadly force, grave danger has to be imminent. So I think that this is where, if I was in the legislature, and I've, outlined this proposal, we need a riot protection act here in Wisconsin where we change the paradigm. And we've got castle doctrine to deal with when someone is inside of your home, but what about in a mob situation? Are there things that the legislature could propose that we could debate of how to give people more protection in these riot mob situations? And there's conditions that could key those off. Look, if there's been a state of emergency declared, that way these protections or these extra allowances of use of force wouldn't be available on any given night of any day of the year. But if there's an emergency situation where your local mayor has called a state of emergency, where there's a curfew imposed, anybody on the street is breaking the law, so then maybe we should allow people to use deadly force to protect their property under certain circumstances. Again, there's a whole bunch of other, I've kind of outlined this, and it's more detailed than we have time for here in the show, but I think the legislature in Madison, the Republicans, should look at this and say, these citizens are being hung out to dry. There's ways that laws could protect them, and we should start having those debates.
Let's go next to Al in Milwaukee. Good evening, Al. You're on the air.
Oh, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Al.
Hey, thank you very much. You know, I watch this channel. I watch this channel on a regular basis, but I do love the Christian literature. But I'm having a problem with this one. We are a Christian channel, and we are a Christian country, and I think more of Christ needs to be preached more than this Second Amendment right now. I think what covers all is the love of God. And I'm hearing this gentleman, and I do understand and I agree with him. I'm a police supporter, man. But I don't want just one side to be heard. I think it would be very, very, let's say, encouraging to hear a different opinion.
Well, and that's why we open the phone lines for people to give their different opinion here, Al. But let me just say this, and time is not going to allow us to go into it right now because we've done a full hour on radio on the topic of a biblical look at self-defense. And there is a biblical basis for self-defense to take place. Thank you, Al, for raising that issue here. But this is not something that's foreign from Christianity as far as self-defense and caring for oneself and one's family.
Yeah, and why do we carry in the first place? And I always tell people that the reason that we carry is out of love. I mean, I carry a gun to protect myself and my family because my family loves me and I love them. And we carry for the, and there's a saying that, you know, evil prevails when good folks do nothing. I mean, we carry so that good can prevail, so that the law-abiding can prevail, because without that, then evil prevails. And because we love what's good, because we love, you can only use a gun in self-defense legally. That's the only legal use of a gun is self-defense. And if you love life, I mean, when we talk about being pro-life and things, if you love life, if you don't have the right to defend your life, then you don't really have the right to life. And we love life, and life is sacred. And so the ability to protect that is the basis of self-defense in the Second Amendment.
Let's go to Mike next in Waldo. Hi, Mike. You're on the air.
Oh, hi. Yes. Let me mute this here. Okay. Yeah, hi. It's very intriguing. I'm calling from Waldo, but forgive me for not maybe getting the first part of the show, but the straw purchase regarding Kyle Rittenhouse, the straw purchase, could you define the terms there? Is it strong or straw?
S-T-R-A-W. So are you asking what is a straw purchase?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
So essentially what a straw purchase is where someone who's not legally allowed to own, or someone buys a gun for someone else who's not legally allowed to own or possess that. But that's usually in the context of, you know, a convicted felon. Convicted felons aren't allowed to own guns. They give someone, here's $500, go into that gun store and buy me this type of gun. That's a straw purchase. So what in this situation, I don't believe that, and again, we'll find out what the facts of the case are, whether it was could be determined as straw purchase or not. But if Kyle's legally allowed to possess that gun, then it wouldn't have been a straw purchase. I can purchase in the state of Wisconsin. You have to be 21 to purchase a handgun in a gun store, but you can purchase a handgun from a private party sale at 18. When you're under that age of 18, a parent or others could provide you with the gun for use. So, you know, in this situation, there might be some gray area of whether that falls under the term of a straw purchase, but the purpose of a straw purchase is to keep convicted felons from having firearms. And a straw purchase traditionally is when someone gives money to someone to buy a gun for them because they couldn't pass the background check themselves.
People want to be in contact with your organization. You've got a website, wisconsincarry.org.
Yeah, so wisconsincarry.org. We're shifting away. We used to use Facebook for social media, but due to the egregious censorship of Facebook, we're on MeWe, we're on Parler. So if you go to MeWe and search Wisconsin Carry, but you can go to our website, wisconsincarry.org, and you'll see links in our news report, our news section of how to contact the organization. Through those social media outlets.
Right, and if you just go there and you've got the links to the Parler and to the MeWe as well.
Right on the front page under our news section.
Great. Again, that's wisconsincarry.org. You're concerned, though, about what you call big tech censorship.
Yeah, I mean, this is troubling. I mean, I was, election night, 7 p.m., I was on Facebook, suddenly was logged out, couldn't get back in. I was banned from Facebook, no reason, no justification. Even Senator Johnson's staff looked into it, and Facebook refused to give him any reasons why. And so we know that our message isn't able to get out there in the network news media. And then social media was one way that we had to get information out there. And now with big tech censorship, that's being infringed upon as well. Now, fortunately, there's some alternative sources like Parler and like MeWe, but Facebook is obviously, I mean, 100 times, 1,000 times the size of MeWe. So. And what we also see is as these big organizations, Facebook and others, when you see other social media outlets growing, then Facebook buys them up, which is that's monopolistic behavior. So I don't think we'll see it in the next administration if it's Biden-Harris, but we would love to see antitrust action against, we broke up telephone companies when they were monopolizing the telephone industry. When Facebook is monopolizing social media, I think there's some antitrust that could be looked at as well. And I think Bob Barr, even the Attorney General, even made reference to that a few weeks back. Unfortunately, new administration, I don't think will have any interest in it, but people should really find alternative sources like MeWe, because Facebook and Twitter are an exceptional amount of censorship. And it's going to be very difficult to network with other like-minded folks and that's the goal here, is to keep like-minded folks from being able to network and work together and work towards a common cause.
We have just a minute remaining. I guess as I hear all of these issues here tonight, Nick, the important aspect for people to have, the key word that comes to my mind is vigilance on all these matters, because it's really going to take the vigilance on the part of many to secure and to defend that Second Amendment right.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary times, and in the past, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but when we see elections that many people believe, I mean, there's millions and millions of people in this country that don't trust elections. That's pretty scary. And so, we need both conservatives. First, conservatives should remember that they're not alone. I mean, there's 72 million people who felt the same way you did this past election. But whether it's, we need Republicans in Madison and Republicans in all elected offices to do everything that they can, not go along to get along, but really push for audits of elections, support the Second Amendment, don't believe the media line, because if we've learned anything over the past several years, it's the media doesn't accurately represent the feelings of the majority of people in this country.
Nick, thank you for being with us tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Jim.
WisconsinCarry.org is the website, wisconsincarry.org. Thanks for watching In Focus. Good night.